The Cleveland Browns are officially in full offseason mode. There are a lot of burning questions. We're going to try to tackle some of them now. The OBR's Pete Smith is here. Your latest Locked On Browns starts now.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound, LGB on the LOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, joined by the OBR's Pete Smith. Appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day. The everyday crowd, the numbers keep getting higher. If you're not in by now, what are you doing? Subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Show is always available. It's always free wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, we started this yesterday, and obviously we're going to do this, with several guests that come in over the next few weeks. Pete Smith of the OBR joining here today. Pete, when you look at this, and obviously, Kansas City, 3 Super Bowls, basically now dominating the AFC over the past 5 years. This is, and as much as everybody, you want to look to the AFC North because, of course, you want to measure yourself, against your constituents. But the ultimate is to measure yourself against the Kansas City Chiefs. And here was a team that kind of just made their way through the regular season, started to get hot when it mattered, improved during the playoffs, and obviously finished off with a Super Bowl victory over the San Francisco 49ers. Some of that by doing maybe more legwork as far as understanding rules. We'll see, obviously. But Pete, this is the holy grail right now. This is the measuring stick, and it is for everybody in the NFL, but most certainly in the AFC and for the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, so there's no one place where the Browns are super far behind the Chiefs. It's sort of the aggregate that potentially makes the big difference. Obviously, the biggest difference is between Pat Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, at least Deshaun Watson currently. If he plays more like the Deshaun Watson that's been expected, that gap closes quite a bit. But like in terms of offense, if the Browns are better this year, I don't think they're going to be far behind the Chiefs. Their defense wasn't far behind the Chiefs, other than the fact that they've got to be able to now evolve and adapt to be able to deal with more things. Spagnuolo's defense in Kansas City was really good at dealing with a lot, even though it certainly seems like the Chiefs borrowed quite a bit from the Browns in terms of how they played the 49ers. And then the special teams. There's no one area where you're sitting there going, man, the Browns are super far behind. They're never going to catch up. Other than if you look at quarterback, maybe you look at it and just think you're hopeless that you're never going to be able to catch Mahomes. But it's just the overall total is what can be a little daunting. And they've got that's why, it's the whole, you one bite at a time type mentality. You've got to try to improve in every little area and hope that the total of those improvements helps you catch up, because ultimately if the Browns have to play the Chiefs, they've got to beat them, in the postseason. They've got to beat them once in a 60-minute game. They don't have to beat them, multiple times. It just comes down to the one game.
And when you look at this, and obviously, there's one area, and I don't think any team in the NFL can match that up. Obviously, no team in the NFL can really say that they have a quarterback that can go basically one-on-one against Patrick Mahomes. Maybe there's one quarterback in the entire AFC, perhaps Joe Burrow, if he comes back 110% healthy between Josh Allen and himself. Those two guys could maybe go one game and go, quarter for quarter, drive for drive with a player of Patrick Mahomes. So the thing will be, obviously, is, try to have some areas maybe where you can top them. Defensively could be one. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to have a lot of work to do to try to bring back as much as they can of that defense. Offensively, the Chiefs can do more with less. Obviously, moving on from a player like Tyreek Hill, having a player like Rashee Rice step up, getting Mecole Hardman, and that whole weird scenario, but having him have an impact in the Super Bowl as well. Kelsey, they run the ball good. They don't necessarily run the ball as well as the Browns did in the peak of the Browns running game. So these are all things that you got to try to emphasize and improve upon, because even if you get the best out of Deshaun Watson, it's probably still a tier or a level below Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean, part of what allowed the Chiefs to be successful was they played good defense. The Browns are capable of that, but they controlled both lines of scrimmage. And going into last year, everybody thought that was going to be the trademark for the Browns. That was the reason you thought that no matter what else happened, that would allow them to be super successful. And that worked largely on the defensive side of the ball, but injuries made that almost impossible offensively. So being healthy and being more consistent offensive line wise will be key. I think they've got to make changes more along lines of additions to ensure that the Browns offensive line continues to be a strength. But that's the thing that sort of unfortunately becomes part of the equation, is the Chiefs have gotten good fortune in terms of the ball bouncing as it did off a guy's foot in the Super Bowl, or health-wise. I mean, the Chiefs have not had to deal with, certainly didn't have to deal with the amount of injuries the Browns did last year. And that is unfortunately a thing that, you can't control within reason. So that is a legit issue. But that's why I would hope, watching these playoffs, if you watched what made the Ravens successful, if you watched what made the Chiefs successful, if you watched the 49ers, if you watched the Lions, they all controlled the line of scrimmage when they had to, and they all were able to run the ball when they had to. The Browns couldn't last year, and that has to be a major priority. Right behind getting Deshaun Watson to be that dude, the running game has to be good, has to be effective, and it has to be able to get yards when they need it. And then defensively, they've just got to be able to do more than they did last year. I think I can excuse a lot of the issues that they had against certain teams by virtue of the fact it was year one. You were trying to get a very clear identity, and having done that, now it becomes, where do you go from here? How do you evolve? How do you, now with all this time to look at it and prepare, can you now expand your identity? Can you now allow your defense to do more than just this one thing? Because if that's not the case, then we're probably going to be sitting here next year disappointed with the defense getting gouged in games by teams that are able to do the same things that we saw this year.
And we will obviously get a firsthand look at the Kansas City Chiefs as they will travel in the 2024 regular season to Cleveland, an open facility for however much longer that will possibly be for your Cleveland Browns, and trying to get the best of Deshaun Watson. Unlike the Kansas City Chiefs, who can have their quarterback elevate, the Browns are not in that position right now. They need to try to put everything in place to make sure Deshaun can get back to that level. So Deshaun might need a dude or two dudes, and we're going to get to that. Your latest Locked On Browns continues. Appreciate everybody for sticking around. DoorDash went all out for game day, and DoorDash stuff from all the ads to one lucky winner. Cars, snacks, even tax software. DoorDash is the all-in-one app for your everyday needs, from restaurants and groceries to flowers and gifts. So next time you're running low on dinner ideas, pet supplies, or just time, you can get so much more than you realized delivered. Whatever watch party or anything party you've got coming up, get it delivered with DoorDash. Get dinner for tonight, groceries for the week, or a consolation prize for your sad friends in San Francisco, all through DoorDash. Your latest Locked On Browns continues. Your host, Jeff Lloyd. Appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every day. We are joined today by the OBR's Pete Smith. Now, Pete, 2 years ago, early March, Browns make what turned out to be an absolute gem of a trade. 5th-round pick to the Dallas Cowboys. Amari Cooper comes in, puts together 2 stellar seasons of production and play for the Cleveland Browns last offseason. And it was a little bit more of a dalliance. The name that wouldn't go away, the trade possibility that wouldn't go away. Most of us wrote it off for dead. Mary Kay Cabot almost every week, every couple of days, kept trying to, take the the flame and trying to raise those flames, and all of a sudden it did come to fruition. Cleveland Browns make the addition, trade for wide receiver Elijah Moore. The Browns probably need one more proven commodity and probably will spend draft capital on a wide receiver here. I know you've got a name that you've been actually funneling to me that you and you guys over at the OBR keep hearing. That doesn't seem to be going away, but there would be options through free agency. And look, everybody, T. Higgins got tagged. Look, David Mulligetta is not an idiot. He's going to try to do the best he can for the Cincinnati Bengals, but he's also going to make sure that T. Higgins gets a boatload of money. That is his number one priority, not what is best for the Cincinnati Bengals. Other wide receivers on the free agent market, receivers that will be available through trade, but you can't keep doing this, with the Goodwins of the world, the Grants of the world. The Browns need to get somebody in here that they can basically write it in and say, okay, here's a guy, 65, 808, whatever. The Browns need a proven commodity at the wide receiver position, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an opportunity for them to take themselves to the next level. I certainly don't buy into the idea that the argument around the Chiefs being that, oh, you don't need wide receivers anymore because Patrick Mahomes is really good. So trade to me makes the most sense just by virtue of the fact that the Browns are going to have cap room. They're going to be in a position to use that as a weapon. And there are going to be teams that are trying to dump salary, that are trying to either a player doesn't fit where they're going, or they can't afford them, or whatever, which is exactly what happened with Amari Cooper. Jerry Jones no longer liked him. I would not hate if CeeDee Lamb did something like that and said, got Jerry Jones to say, hey, here's CeeDee Lamb for a 5th round pick. But there's going to be opportunities to make trades and add another proven veteran. If you get somebody on an expiring, it could work out for the Browns in the sense that it doesn't preclude them from extending somebody like Elijah Moore if Elijah Moore plays well and they want to keep him. It doesn't necessarily stop you from, if Cedric Tillman continues to get better, to utilize him going forward. And if that player were to then sign somewhere else, you could potentially get a compensatory pick back and get the investment back in a couple of years. So that's one option. You could try to go super big. You could go nuts and say, let's see what the 49ers are willing to do with Brandon Ayuk. And look, there's a lot of ways you could sit there and go, that'll never happen. But it would make a lot of sense for the Browns because it would answer the question of what happens with life after Amari Cooper. You would be able to structure the contract as they have with so many to make it cheap early and then pay it off over time. And he's a phenomenal player. So that sets the table for everybody else. And you'd have at least that 1 year with him and Amari Cooper, which would be really good. Now, do the Browns have enough assets for that? Difficult to say, but I suspect Andrew Berry will at least make the call to see if that's even a possibility. And then we'll see about free agents. I'm not as excited about the free agent options as most people are. Gabe Davis does nothing for me. I liked him coming out of college, but the Bills have given him every opportunity to be a number 2 receiver, and he just hasn't done it. Calvin Ridley is inconsistent at everything in his life, let alone football. Another guy who's gotten every opportunity to sort of be that guy, and he just hasn't been. So maybe there's
Pittman's going to make a king's ransom. He's another one. Yeah.
There may be opportunities. I like Marquise, whichever one it is from Oklahoma, that with the Arizona Cardinals. I like Marquise Brown. I like Hollywood Brown. I like his game. I just don't think – I think he will get way more money than he's worth. I think he would actually be a really good fit here, but unless he's willing to make way less than I think he's going to get, I don't think that makes much sense. So trade to me is the easiest way to get it done. It's just a question of what's an opportunity, what's realistically there, and if they want to make that big swing. I mean, certainly the Browns have not been afraid to do that to this point. Are they willing to trade, another first-round pick, in another year to get a guy like Brandon Ayuk? It's interesting. So they've got any number of options. I also don't necessarily, you and I would certainly say it's a need. I think Andrew Berry has categorized it as not. I think in Andrew Berry terminology, it's just an opportunity. And certainly Andrew Berry is a guy who wants to take advantage of opportunities to make this group continue to get better, continue to give as many weapons as possible to Deshaun Watson. And now Ken Dorsey is the offensive coordinator. So I I think it's going to be something we have to keep an eye on. There are certainly guys out there that will be available, certainly guys that could make this team better. It's really just a question of what's the right fit for this team, what's the right fit in the offense, and what's the right fit in trade. The draft class is shallow relative to just numbers, and the Browns have a lot of late round picks. So whether it's a wide receiver or another position player, I could see the Browns being very eager to deal some of those late round picks to get proven veterans and sort of do what the Eagles have done for years, but particularly for this draft class.
And, again, and now, obviously these are things that you're hamstrung with when obviously, the Browns are going to see 53 selections go off the board. And Pete and I, we both talked about this, Browns obviously would be looking possibly to draft an offensive tackle, would be possibly looking to draft a wide receiver. Certainly going to be a run. Hopefully there's not a run on both, obviously, by the time the Browns make their first selection. Well, and the thing now, and now bringing up a guy like Hollywood Brown, Pete, now here's a guy proven, commodity as far as getting, I don't even know if proven, maybe, but the thing is those are the guys that the Browns have never been able to make work. And look, in the 2 years, Deshaun Watson's been the quarterback. That is a guy that's been able to work for them. That was the hopes of what a Marquise Goodwin was, those types of guys. Now, obviously, with Hollywood Brown, the point is you're going to pay for the BMW, but you're probably going to get more of a Toyota. There's nothing wrong with it, but if there's no reason you're going to pay well over sticker price if you're not going to get it. It just doesn't make sense. Obviously some teams going to be heavily involved and basically pay the freight. So I do believe this, and I know you guys have been harping on me, the certain Chargers wide receiver, and maybe the Browns are going to change the whole philosophy of we tried to go small, it's never really worked, so maybe now let's try to go more bigger body catch point type of guys, that type of thing as well.
It's possibility. And the other part with Marquise Brown is everybody desperately wants to get Deshaun Watson a Will Fuller. Is that really what Marquise Brown even is? No. I mean, I think he's more of an underneath, intermediate guy that run after catch, which is fine. I like his game. But to your point, I don't know if you're going to get that. And that's what we were thinking that Elijah Moore was going to provide. So are we chasing after another guy that's doing what we want Elijah Moore to do? So I do think I think the Browns want to get somebody who can make plays down the field. And that doesn't necessarily have to be fast. And, this is a fan base that seems to think 4.4 and 4.5 is not fast with Amari Cooper and DPJ. But if you can get a guy who can go up and make catches in traffic, or you can get a guy who can just knows how to high point effectively down the field, that may be what they need. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins was not a burner, and obviously he and Deshaun had a ton of success in Houston. So it's really about skill set more than necessarily physical, raw physical talent. Now, again, I'm certainly not going to complain about speed, but I just think that becomes a consideration for fit, as opposed to we're trying to jam a peg into a square hole type thing and make something that's not going to work somehow, become something that's just simply not going to happen.
Very true. Very true. We're going to continue on here. Had these conversations for many years on Locked On Browns about defensive line. And as much work was done last year, you look at one position, and already looks like it's going to be, a very, very big talking point here this offseason as well. We'll continue your latest Locked On Browns. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and many, many more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sports book partner of the NBA. Continuing on your latest Locked On Browns, your host, Jeff Lloyd. I appreciate all of you who make Locked On Browns your first listen. If you're not part of the everyday crowd by now, make a new plan, subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Show's always available, always free, wherever you get your podcast. The OBR's Pete Smith in here today. Pete, for years, where are the D tackles? Where are the D tackles? Where are the D tackles? Last year, obviously, heightened effort by this, front office with new defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz. You go out and you load the room. You look at the room right now. You still have, obviously, Dalvin Tomlinson. You still have Siaki Ika, free agency for Jordan Elliott, free agency for Maurice Hurst, free agency for Shelby Harris. Zadarius Smith will be a free agent as well. You look at it, and obviously you're going to have money to spend, and obviously some of these guys the Browns would like to bring back in the fold. Question is, do you think Alex Wright is on the right, arc as far as improvement and becoming more and more closer to a full-time player? Of course, Agbo in the mix as well. What is there a question of whether or not either one is a bigger priority? Because obviously I think the Browns are going to hit both hard, but you can't go from the defensive line play they had last year and take a step back. It's just not going to work for Jim Schwartz's system.
No, and I think that's part of the reason that they brought in Jacques Césaire as the defensive line coach. You look at the production from the defensive line, and even though across the board it was better, it still ended up being Myles Garrett and guys. Like, it wasn't what everybody was hoping for, which was Zadarius Smith was going to have 10 sacks and the interior guys were going to have more production. Now, I'm excited about what Alex Wright can be. I would still treat him as a third defensive end at this point, and get somebody else in there to force him to prove that he's more than that. I still hope that's Z, but it all comes down to cost. Like, Zadarius Smith is hugely valuable because he can play that base end and give you a lot of credibility as a run defender, but kicks inside. And if you don't have a guy like him, then Myles Garrett theoretically becomes the guy you kick inside. And I love that, but the Browns don't seem to, and it doesn't seem like Myles does either. And I think some of that had to do with the shoulder. Putting him inside at that point would have been unrealistic. But even when they slid him inside, a lot of the time it was standing up. Worked great, but you need somebody who has more credibility in there if you're going to do it, to have their hand on the ground. So I do think defensive tackle is a big deal. I would love to get Shelby Harris back. I think he was great for what he brought. But you also have to consider the fact, I don't think Dalvin Tomlinson's going to be here after another year. We'll see, but they've sort of got a plan ahead on what they want to do there. Certainly, whether Maurice Hurst is just going to end up coming back here. In some ways, the injury may have been a blessing for the Browns. In that regard, it may hurt his ability to get more money. And Maurice Hurst seems very excited about the possibility of coming back to Cleveland. So those things may solve themselves to a point. Again, I have no interest in seeing Jordan Elliott come back. I'll just say that. He can go. How
he made it 4 years, unless you talk to somebody physically within the buildings of Berea, we'll never know. We'll never know.
He was such a good prospect. He just hasn't been that guy. And look, I will give him a ton of credit for beating the crap out of New Jersey native Quentin Nelson as a pass rusher against the Colts. But overall, he just wasn't good. And like, Jim Schwartz did not fix him. He was still crap. It's just that the 10 guys around him were just much better, and it allowed him to be slightly elevated. But overall, he was still the same guy. That was forever a frustration, and I think they do need to improve that spot. Siaki Ika has a lot to prove. He was miserable last year and just has to prove he's got an NFL body. Defensive end is an opportunity. If Z were to walk, you have some options as far as how you want to go. If they want to draft somebody, theoretically they could. I think they're going to want another veteran. I would want another veteran because they've already got Isaiah McGuire. They're still getting Alex Wright, who, again, I think is on the right path. And you've still got Myles Garrett, obviously. But I think they want another guy, in addition to Okoronkwo, to just continue to get more credibility. Because ultimately, I think for whatever the Browns got, which, let's be very clear, compared to what the Browns have had on the defensive line, last year was professionalism and changed the world for them. But it's also clear that they want to be better. And so they're not going to just sit tight and be like, okay, I guess we'll see what happens. I think they're going to be super aggressive at that position and continue adding as many guys as they can to be able to make that a weapon, because we can't watch this team be in a situation where if Myles Garrett does not play out of his mind, that the defense completely disappears, because that has happened every time Myles Garrett did not play outstanding. The defense basically was a non-factor.
Yeah, and I think actually, and I kind of actually like the way you went with that point. Yes, the names were better this past season than they had been in the past, but and it did just seem like a lot of times, and you look, you fans see it, it. Some of you were certainly guilty of it. Well, Myles didn't do anything. The defense had a bad. Well, no. When you brought in some better personnel, you really thought that there was going to be days where if Myles didn't fill up the sack column, because you do need to understand that Myles still gives you a great impact every single time he steps on the field. That's part of the NFL. Other guys are supposed to start to fill in those columns. And in years past, those guys didn't have the abilities. This year was different. And on a lot of those weeks, not only did maybe Myles not have his best statistical and performance, many others did not as well. That's all we're going to say on that, obviously. He is Pete Smith, over, of course, now with the OBR. Still the podcast with Bree out. Does the reaction show, obviously, with Brad Ward. All great stuff over the OBR. His daily content you're going to get over there. Obviously going to switch really full into draft coverage here as the weeks and months here as we start prepping towards that final weekend in April. Make sure you're following @_Pete Smith _ myself, Jeff Lloyd. I appreciate you all who come out every day, make Locked On Browns your first lesson. Everybody who sent out messages yesterday has kind of told you what was going on here. I do appreciate it. We are managing our way through it. So again, thank you, everybody. The everydayers, you guys are the best. I suggest you be more like the everydayers. Grab the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Show is always available. It's always free wherever you get your podcasts. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. LGB on the LOB. Let's go Browns.